go ahead and replace the fuel rail pressure sensor on this 2006 Ford Taurus with a 3-liter engine. Now you'll see the original sensor mounted on the fuel rail here underneath the upper intake plenum. So in this particular vehicle, we've got the sensor on the rail telling the PCM and the fuel pump control module how much pressure is in the rail. This is an electronically controlled fuel pump, so it can raise and lower the pressure here depending on the feedback from this particular sensor. So first thing I need to do is disconnect the electrical connector here. And there's also a vacuum line on the back of the sensor here now. The main purpose of this vacuum line is to give a reference of how much engine vacuum is present to the sensor. Now that's going to change the calibration of what the actual pressure is at the tip of the injector. Because remember, the injectors are submersed into the intake where they're subjected to engine vacuum. So it's going to be a kind of a corrected reading based on that engine vacuum. So one of the first things I need to do is take my 21 millimeter end wrench and an 18 millimeter end wrench, and I'm going to loosen the power steering line here and get that up out of my way. It's going to give me a little bit better access to remove the sensor up off the fuel rail here. Okay, now that I've got this loose, it gives me some more room here, but I'm also going to go ahead and remove this fuel line. So there's a clip here which I can just slide out of place. Now on the back side of the line, there's a button that I can push, and just by pushing it, it releases the line lock and allows me to get it out of here. So you can see a little better. As I push that, that releases the line up out of here. I'll set that out of the way. Now that's also gone ahead and relieved any fuel pressure that might be on this particular sensor. So I can now take my 8 millimeter socket and a 1/4 inch ratchet and loosen up the 2 bolts holding the fuel rail pressure sensor in place. Now once the bolts are removed, I'm going to gently lift and twist at the same time and pull my old sensor up out of there. And we can see that the old O-ring or gasket came out with it. So now I'm going to just use a little bit of gasoline to help lubricate the O-ring on the new one, or maybe even just some saliva will do the trick. But we don't want to get it too dry, or we don't want to use silicone either, because that can cause it to swell up and cause problems later on. But with the same twisting motion, I'll push it down into place, get it settled in there, and then reinstall the 2 hold down bolts. And you can kind of see now why I wanted to remove this power steering line. It gives us a little more access to pick this up out of there, and I don't want to damage my new sensor when I'm installing it. Once that's done, I'll slide the vacuum line back in place, make my electrical connection, get that locked in good, and then I'm going to work on the power steering line here, get that put back in place as well. Okay, now that we've got our power steering line tight, next I'm going to clip the fuel line back on, make sure it locks in place there, and then I will install the keeper or the other lock here, make sure it doesn't come off later on. So next I'm going to key up the vehicle. Just turn the key to the run position for about 10 seconds and turn it off. Then come back and look here, make sure everything's nice and dry. I want to make sure that I'm not leaking any fuel here. If I am, I'm going to have to take it off and re-inspect that O-ring. But if everything's nice and dry, then we can clear any trouble codes that were set by the previous faulty sensor, and the car should be ready to go. Hopefully now you understand what it takes to replace the fuel rail pressure sensor on this Ford Taurus with a 3-liter engine.